order to put this in, one of the first things I'll do is I'll take my wrench while I have it up, and I'll actually make sure that bleed screw will come loose right now. In this case, I have to take the little cap off to kind of snake it around, but I'll pop that loose just to make sure it does come loose, but make sure it's snug when I put it back together. So now it's just the reverse. I'll put this in place, but I got to make sure I put the bleed screw to the top. I got to line it up and get the brake line started. Then I'll get these started. Then I'll snug these two up, and then finally, when this is firm, I'll snug up the brake line. And by starting the brake line first, it minimizes the amount of time that brake line is open. So I'll pull this little red plug out, and I'll pull the little plug off the line. I won't be needing that there anymore. And it'll start dripping again right away, which I don't want. So I take the new wheel cylinder and I put it in from the front. Line up the brake line with the hole and get that started to thread in. The reason I don't want to put this on first and bolt it down is this allows me room to move the cylinder to get the threads to line up properly so I don't cross thread it. So that's what I want to do. Okay, it's threading in. It's snug. Dripping will be minimized, if not eliminated. Next step will be to put the bolts back in that hold it to the backing plate. And I will start all three of them, or both bolts and the line, before I tighten anything. It just gives me the ability to make fine movements to get things to line up. So they don't need to be tight. They need to be snug. But remember, you're not tightening a huge bolt here. So those are tight. Next thing I'll do is tighten the line. So get the wrench on there and I'll snug it. And you don't want, again, it's a flared fitting, so you don't want to really put a lot of tension on, but you need to have it firm. There we go. The wheel cylinder has been changed, and now we just have to reassemble the brakes. I had mentioned earlier these flats or lands on here that the brake shoe rubs on. The spots that rub are actually where these shoes are bulged out. You see that? That's where they'll rub. They're made for that. Now what I'm feeling for is grooves, and you can see where the paint is worn off, where that shoe has been rubbing. That's normal, but sometimes you'll get a groove worn in there, and you actually will have to do something about that. Sometimes you have to replace the backing plate. Sometimes you can get away with just filing or sanding it smooth. I want to make sure those are clean, and if you have to, if they're rusty or whatever, you want to scuff them with sandpaper or emery cloth. But the next item I use, though, it's a Worth product, CU800, and it's kind of a it's a high temperature anti-corrosive lubricant, and I use this stuff when I do my brake jobs because I find it just does the job really well for me. It has a copper-like consistency, as you can see. So I'll just take a little bit on my finger and I just wipe a small piece on each of those lands or each of those flat spots. That's to lubricate where the shoes are going to rub. Doesn't take a lot. A bit around the pin. And I also put a small dab in each of these push rods. The reason I lubricate that is because you can get noisy brakes. And what causes noisy brakes? Well, what is noise? If you break it down to the basic element, what is noise? Noise is a vibration. If you have a vibration, you get noise. If the vibration is because the metal is sticking and trying to move and then kicks loose and then tries to move and kicks loose again, so it's kind of chattering, that's what's making the noise. If it's just gliding smoothly, the two metal surfaces are gliding smoothly together, they're not going to create that vibration that creates the noise. That's why I lubricate those spots. Another thing that I will use that CU800 on is the star wheel. So the star wheel has to be disassembled, and to make it easy to get the brakes back the same place, I'm going to count the threads that are sticking out here. I could count the number that are in there, but this actually goes well into here, so it's easier just to count the ones that are exposed, and it'll get me in the ballpark. I have 8 threads exposed, so I'll rotate this out, and I'll wash it with Varsol, or preferably Varsol, but in some cases I have used brake cleaner. And you want to clean all the stuff off the threads and everything out of there. So I'll get this cleaned up. It's no different than cleaning the brake parts or the bearings the other day. No use showing you that, so we'll be back in a minute. And we're back. While I have the star wheel adjuster apart, there's a couple things I'm going to do. One is I'm going to inspect everything. I'm looking at the threads to make sure they're not damaged. I look to make sure that this is not corroded too badly, so it's going to move, as well as this. And one of the key things to look for is these teeth. Over time, these can get rounded off, and when they do, your brakes won't adjust very well anymore, if at all. So any of those conditions, you might as well replace it. They're not that expensive. Before I lubricate this, though, one additional step I personally take is I just put that in, make sure it's in there good. And I'll take this, and that screws in there very easily. You can almost spin it. Well, you can spin it now. So I know it's clean. Next I'll take the CU800, the copper lubricant, and I'll put a little bit on the thread. And you don't need a lot. And I'll just basically rotate it. I don't know if you can see that, but it's just putting a small amount on the threads of the star wheel adjuster. It's important to lubricate this because if you don't, it will seize and your brakes won't adjust. So you always want to make sure that's lubricated. Next, I'll turn this in, and I turn it all the way in, and then I'll turn it back out to the number of threads I need. Now, by turning it all the way in, I'm distributing the lubricant, and you can see right here it's oozing out a little bit. You saw how little I put on the threads. That's excess. So by putting it on the threads and not in the bore, if you put it in the bore, the excess will just go down to the end and stay in. But by putting it on the threads, it's remaining out of the star wheel adjuster. So I can turn it in until it basically bottoms out. Then I'll take the rag, clean that off, just the excess a little bit. Then I'll take this out, the number of threads I needed. I needed 8. And that should be 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So that's about where it was. Next step is this piece here, which I will put a little dab on again. Smooth it around. And I don't just want this surface here, I want this flat area here, because that butts up against the main tube on the star wheel adjuster. And it fits. Works well. Okay, now reassembly. Now that I've got everything apart and I've greased that, one of the other things I'm going to do is I'm going to inspect all the parts. These pins do tend to wear where they go through the backing plate, through rust, corrosion, and slight movement. They will wear and get a little thinner. So I'm checking that to see if it is. If there's any wear there, I'll replace this. I'll actually replace all the hardware, because you buy it in a kit form. If you just broke one and you had a spare one around that was the same, you could use it. But normally, if you have any problems with this stuff, you buy the kit and it'll have all the springs and the retainers. I'll also take the time to double check the retainers, and I have seen some where this gets thin and it pounds out that little hole and will actually pull through. Also checking the springs. I'd mentioned colors on them. I don't know if you can see that, but there's actually a white stripe and a little bit of green on that. This other spring, if you look, these two are the same length in all ways, and you'll notice this one also has a green with a little white stripe on it, basically telling me that these springs are the same. They are interchangeable. When you're inspecting them, also make sure that there's no wear on here. And this is another spot that I lubricate. I lubricate here and a little bit around here. So I'll do that. Just a small dab on each of those spots. That's all it takes. And there'll be guys out there that say it's overkill, but this is the way I do it, and I've never had a problem. I don't usually get brake noise, and if it is, it's usually because I forgot something, or there's a faulty part. Now this part is ready to go back on with the spring, and that spring will just go in through the hole and rotate around, and as you can see it now, when it's lined up the way it will be on the vehicle, it's not going to pull out.